It was one of those heavy late-afternoon Florida days where the air just sits on your shoulders and everything feels slow, thick, waiting, and I remember thinking how quiet the street was, almost suspiciously quiet, like the calm before someone does something incredibly stupid. My phone buzzed before I even stepped out of the truck, not a text, not a call, but that sharp, sterile security alert tone that cuts through your spine, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. Satellite uplink disrupted. That's what it said. Not signal weak. Not connection unstable. Disrupted. And the second I read that word, I already knew who it was. Her name isn't important, so let's call her Denise Whitmore. President of the Cypress Ridge HOA, self-appointed guardian of uniform mailbox paint and grass height compliance. A woman who carried her clipboard the way a sheriff carries a badge, like it gave her oxygen. Denise had been circling my property for months, slow drive-bys, passive-aggressive violation notices about unauthorized structures, comments about how my satellite array looked commercial. What she didn't understand, or maybe refused to understand, was that I work in communications infrastructure. That dish she hated so much wasn't just for streaming football games. It was tied into a private security network that interfaced with local emergency relay systems and, through agreement, supported supplemental camera feeds used by county deputies during incidents. Not secret, not illegal, fully documented, fully permitted. But Denise didn't care about facts. Denise cared about control. I rounded the corner of my driveway, and there she was. 45 years old, tennis visor, capri pants, standing on a borrowed extension ladder leaned against the steel pole that anchored my uplink dish. And she was yanking on it, physically pulling at cabling with one hand, while clutching her clipboard in the other, like it might issue a citation mid-climb. My wife, Laura, and my daughter, Maddie, were already outside, both stunned, both filming because at this point documenting Denise had become a survival strategy. Denise looked down at them and shouted, "This is a violation of community visual standards. I'm authorized to remove non-compliant fixtures." Authorized. That word again. I stepped out slowly, not yelling, not running, just letting the moment breathe, because when someone is spiraling, calm is louder than screaming. "Denise," I said, keeping my voice level, "that's private property." She scoffed, like I'd just told her the sky was optional. The HOA has jurisdiction over external modifications visible from the street. She snapped back, tugging harder on a cable that absolutely did not want to be tugged. And then it happened. My phone buzzed again. Secondary alert. County relay connection offline. That's when my stomach dropped. Because now this wasn't just about my equipment. Here's the part Denise never bothered to learn. That dish functioned as a redundant node in a distributed monitoring system. During power outages or signal congestion, it acted as a backup uplink for nearby traffic cameras and emergency response feeds. It was part of a resilience plan, the kind of thing you don't notice until you desperately need it. And she was actively disabling it because she didn't like how it looked from across the cul-de-sac. I looked up at her again. "Denise, you are interfering with critical communications equipment tied to public safety infrastructure." She froze for half a second, then rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't be dramatic." Dramatic. That word hit different when a woman is halfway up a ladder dismantling emergency support systems. Laura quietly said, "The deputies are already notified." That wasn't a bluff. The alert system auto-reports disruptions of that magnitude. Denise blinked. Just once. But it was enough. Neighbors started emerging from their garages like prairie dogs sensing tension. A couple of Denise's usual HOA supporters were there too, phones out, probably expecting another triumphant board enforcement action moment. But the energy had shifted. Denise kept talking, voice louder now, less certain. "The community voted on maintaining aesthetic cohesion," she insisted, like cohesion outranked state law. She tried twisting the mounting bracket, and that's when the entire dish tilted slightly off alignment, not falling, but enough to trigger a third alert. My screen lit up again. Full relay loss. That was the moment I stopped being patient homeowner and became infrastructure professional. "Denise," I said firmly, stepping closer. "Step down from the ladder immediately. You are trespassing. You are damaging federally regulated communications hardware. And you are creating criminal exposure for yourself." The word criminal hung in the air heavier than the humidity. She looked down at me like she was calculating whether confidence alone could override physics, law, and common sense. This wasn't about a dish. It never was. It was about the fact that I didn't fold when she sent warning letters. It was about the fact that my property didn't bend to her version of order. She couldn't control me through paperwork, so she escalated to physical interference. And here's the part that still amazes me. She genuinely believed she was winning. She waved that clipboard like it was a shield and said, "The board will back me." That's when sirens echoed faintly at the end of the street. Not loud, not cinematic, just present, real. Denise heard them too. Her grip loosened slightly. One of her supporters quietly stepped backward. The ladder wobbled. For the first time all afternoon, Denise looked unsure. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I just said, "You should step down now." Because in that moment, the fantasy cracked. The illusion of HOA omnipotence met the brick wall of actual authority. And the worst part for her? This was being recorded from 3 angles. She climbed down slowly, muttering something about community rights. The dish hung crooked, wires strained, alerts still flashing on my phone. Deputies' vehicles rolled into view. Calm, procedural, not rushed, but not casual either. Denise tried to stand tall as they approached, already preparing her speech. I could see it on her face, the rehearsed indignation, the expectation that her title would carry weight. But titles don't override jurisdiction, and control doesn't equal competence. And standing there, watching the deputies step out of their vehicles while Denise clutched that clipboard like a lifeline, I realized something. This wasn't just about a neighborhood dispute. This was about what happens when someone mistakes authority for ownership and ego for expertise. All right, let's pause the movie for a second because this is where people get confused about what an HOA actually is versus what someone like Denise thinks it is. According to standard procedure, a homeowners association can enforce covenants, conditions, and restrictions that homeowners agreed to when they bought into the community, things like lawn maintenance, paint colors, architectural approvals. But those powers are civil, not criminal, and they absolutely do not override property law or state and federal regulations. An HOA board member cannot trespass. They cannot seize equipment. They cannot unilaterally remove structures without due process, notice, and in many states, a court order. From a legal perspective, the second Denise stepped onto my ladder and began manipulating hardware she did not own, she crossed from code enforcement dispute into potential trespass, vandalism, and interference with communications infrastructure. That's not neighborhood drama. That's liability. And here's the deeper layer most people miss. This is a psychological trap. When someone is given limited authority in a small environment, especially one built around compliance and rules, it can create what psychologists call authority inflation. The role starts to feel bigger than it is. The title becomes identity. Denise wasn't trying to fix a dish. She was defending her sense of control. And when ego gets wrapped around authority, logic becomes optional. That's the danger. Because once someone believes they are protecting order, they justify almost anything. And that's exactly where this situation was headed. The deputies stepped out of their cruisers like this was just another Tuesday call. Calm, unreadable, hands resting near their belts, but not tense. And that composure alone shifted the entire energy of the street. Denise straightened up immediately, chin lifted, clipboard tucked to her chest like she was about to present quarterly earnings instead of explain why she'd been yanking on communications hardware 15 feet off the ground. One of the deputies, Officer Ramirez, nodded at me first, not in favoritism, just an acknowledgement of who made the call. Then he looked at the dish, tilted slightly off axis, cables hanging wrong, and you could see his expression tighten just a notch. "What's going on here?" he asked evenly. And Denise jumped in before I could speak. "I'm the HOA president," she announced, like that was a jurisdiction. "This structure violates community standards, and I was removing it under board authority." She even gestured toward the pole like it was contraband. Ramirez didn't react to the title at all. He just asked, "Is this your property, sir?" I said yes. "Did you authorize her to access or alter this equipment?" "No." Simple. Clean. He turned back to Denise. "Ma'am, did you have permission?" She hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. "The HOA has rights," she started. Ramirez cut in gently but firmly, "not to trespass." That word landed heavier than anything I'd said earlier. Not dramatic, not emotional, just factual. Another deputy walked around the base of the pole, examining the mounting bracket. "What does this connect to?" he asked me. I explained the redundancy node, the county relay agreement, the fact that the disruption had already triggered automated reports. I even showed them the alerts still flashing on my phone. Timestamped, logged, real. The second deputy's posture changed slightly. "So this affects emergency feeds?" I nodded. "Potentially during outages or high-load incidents." He exhaled through his nose. That subtle law enforcement version of "you've got to be kidding me." Denise tried to regain ground. "He's exaggerating. It's just a satellite dish." And that's when Ramirez looked at her with that patient but unmistakably serious expression and said, "Ma'am, interfering with communications equipment can be a felony depending on impact and intent." Felony. You could almost hear the oxygen leave her lungs. Her supporters, who had been filming from a safe distance, slowly lowered their phones. One of them quietly slipped back into his garage like he suddenly remembered an urgent appointment with absolutely anywhere else. Denise's face flushed red, but she pushed forward, doubling down the way people do when backing out would require admitting fault. "The community voted for aesthetic compliance," she insisted. "This is about property values." And I swear, in that moment, the absurdity was almost cinematic. Property values versus public safety infrastructure. Ramirez kept his voice level. "HOA disputes are civil matters. This is not." He asked her to step aside while they assessed the equipment. She obeyed, but reluctantly, arms folded, jaw tight. Laura squeezed my hand subtly, not in fear, but in solidarity, like we both understood we were watching a lesson unfold in real time. The deputies took photos, documented the alignment shift, radioed in a brief status update. I could hear fragments, interference, documented damage, possible citation. Denise paced slightly, muttering under her breath about overreach and community governance. But the illusion was cracking fast. Authority inflation only works when no one challenges it. Once real authority enters the frame, the costume starts to look like a costume. After a few minutes, Ramirez returned. "Ma'am, you are being issued a citation for trespass and property damage. Further review may determine additional charges depending on the communications impact." He explained it calmly, professionally, no theatrics. Denise's mouth opened slightly, then closed. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "I'm trying to protect the neighborhood." Ramirez didn't argue psychology. He just said, "Protecting the neighborhood doesn't give you the right to break the law." That was it. Clean. Final. She tried one last angle, turning toward me. "You did this," she said, voice shaking now. Not loud, not powerful, just defensive. And I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, because what she was really saying was you didn't submit. You didn't play along with my version of control. I answered quietly. I followed procedure. And that was the truth. According to standard procedure, infrastructure disruptions trigger reporting. According to standard procedure, trespass gets documented. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence. The deputies finished their paperwork, handed her the citation, and you could see the weight of it in her hands. Paper isn't heavy, but accountability is. As they drove off, the street returned to that strange late afternoon stillness, except it felt different now, clearer somehow. Denise stood there for a long second, staring at the dish like it had betrayed her personally. Then she gathered her clipboard, avoided eye contact with everyone, and walked back toward her house without another word. No triumphant speech. No board authority declaration. Just quiet retreat. Maddie exhaled audibly. "She really thought she could just take it down," she said. I nodded. She thought the title made it hers. We spent the next hour realigning the dish, running diagnostics, restoring the relay node. Systems came back online one by one, green indicators replacing red alerts. Order restored. Actual order, not cosmetic order. As the sun dipped lower and the sky turned that orange-pink Florida hue, I felt something settle in my chest. Not victory, not pride, just clarity. Control built on ego collapses under scrutiny. Control built on preparation survives it. And somewhere inside her house that evening, I imagined Denise replayed the moment the word felony entered the conversation, realizing too late that authority isn't something you declare. It's something defined by law, by boundaries, by consequences. And for the first time since she started targeting my property, she had encountered a boundary that didn't bend. So here's where I want to zoom out a little, not as the guy with the crooked satellite dish and 3 security alerts buzzing in his pocket, but as someone who's watched this pattern play out more times than I can count. The lesson here is not that HOAs are evil, or that every board member is one ladder away from a criminal citation. Most associations function quietly, handle landscaping budgets, organize trash pickup schedules, argue about mailbox paint, and life goes on. The problem isn't the structure. The problem is what happens when a person confuses limited administrative authority with personal dominance. That's where things tilt. From a legal perspective, HOA authority is contractual. You agree to covenants when you buy into the neighborhood, and those covenants outline enforcement mechanisms, notices, hearings, fines, sometimes liens. They don't include vigilante hardware removal. They don't override property ownership. They don't grant physical access to someone else's equipment because you dislike how it looks. According to standard procedure, enforcement follows documentation, warning, opportunity to cure, escalation if necessary. It doesn't involve climbing a ladder like you're storming Normandy over a satellite dish. When someone skips that structure and jumps straight to physical action, they aren't being decisive. They're being reckless. But here's the deeper layer. This is a psychological trap. And I don't say that to diagnose Denise from my driveway. I say it because I've seen how easy it is for small amounts of authority to inflate identity. When someone spends months sending violation letters, conducting inspections, casting tie-breaking votes, their brain starts to associate compliance with personal validation. Every time someone trims their hedge because of a notice, it reinforces that feeling of control. And when someone doesn't comply, when someone pushes back calmly, legally, confidently, it doesn't just feel like disagreement. It feels like disrespect. And that's when ego steps in. Ego whispers, you have to assert yourself. You have to show them who's in charge. And once that narrative takes root, the mission shifts from maintaining community standards to defending personal authority. That's how you end up with a grown adult on a ladder, convinced she's preserving property values while disconnecting public safety infrastructure. Not because she's cartoonishly evil, but because she couldn't separate role from self. And here's something I want you to think about. How often does this dynamic show up outside HOAs? Workplace managers who overstep, volunteer board members who weaponize procedure, even family dynamics where someone equates control with love. The scale changes, but the psychology doesn't. Authority without self-awareness becomes brittle. It can't tolerate challenge. And brittle authority cracks loudly when reality pushes back. For me, the moment that stuck wasn't the citation. It wasn't the deputy's arrival. It was the split second when Denise heard the word felony and realized her internal narrative didn't match external law. That collision, ego versus boundary, that's the real climax. Because once someone encounters a boundary that doesn't negotiate with confidence or volume, they're forced to choose. Double down or recalibrate. The lesson here is simple, but it's not easy. Know the limits of your authority. Understand the framework you operate within. If you're on an HOA board, read your governing documents like they matter, because they do. If you're a homeowner, understand your rights just as clearly. Calm knowledge is stronger than loud assumption. Documentation beats outrage. Procedure outlasts ego. And maybe most importantly, don't let a title become your identity. Titles change. Boards rotate. Positions expire. Character doesn't. If the only thing holding your authority together is a clipboard and a sense of superiority, it won't survive contact with law enforcement or even just a well-informed neighbor. I'm not telling this story because I enjoy neighborhood drama. Trust me, I'd rather spend my afternoons doing anything other than realigning communication notes. I'm telling it because it's a reminder. Boundaries matter. Preparation matters. And calm, informed resistance is incredibly powerful. You don't have to outshout someone who's wrong. You just have to outlast them. So I'm curious, have you ever seen authority get inflated like this? Have you dealt with an HOA situation where someone confused governance with control? Drop it in the comments. I read them. And if you're serving on a board right now, maybe take this as a quiet checkpoint. Are you enforcing rules or defending ego? Because when arrogance meets consequence, the outcome is rarely subtle. And as that crooked dish reminded everyone on my street that afternoon, reality doesn't care about titles.